Napoleon Bonaparte, The Rise and Fall of an Emperor. Written and published by C.Irmici. Feel free to subscribe for more content. Now let's get into the book. Introduction. The Legend and Legacy of Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon Bonaparte's name conjures visions of empire, military prowess, and indomitable ambition. A figure both celebrated and condemned, Napoleon's influence on Europe and the world remains profound, even 2 centuries after his death. Born a minor Corsican noble, he would rise to command armies and shape the political landscape of his era, leaving behind a legacy that historians, strategists, and political thinkers continue to debate today. But who was Napoleon beyond the myth? What drove him to conquer? And ultimately, what led to his downfall? This introduction aims to set the stage for the exploration of Napoleon's life, from his early days marked by fierce ambition to his meteoric rise through the military ranks during the turbulence of the French Revolution. As a young officer, Napoleon's exceptional intellect and tenacity quickly distinguished him from his peers, propelling him into positions of influence and setting him on a path toward unprecedented power. But with this power came profound challenges. His campaigns across Europe, though often successful, were fraught with the complexities of managing an empire and maintaining support back home. Through this book, we will trace Napoleon's steps, from the critical events of his career, like the audacious coup of 18 Brumaire, which granted him authority over the French Republic, to his crowning as emperor and the sweeping changes he implemented across the European continent. We'll explore the triumphs and pitfalls of his empire, his groundbreaking reforms in the Napoleonic Code, and the series of military endeavors that ultimately stretched his ambitions too far, particularly the catastrophic Russian campaign. In this journey, you will discover not just the political leader or the strategist but the multifaceted man behind the legend. Napoleon was a visionary who changed the world but was also flawed, prone to overreach, and ultimately his own undoing. His life story is a powerful testament to the complexities of leadership, ambition, and the inescapable consequences of decisions made on the grand stage of history. As we dive into the following chapters, we aim to give readers a nuanced view of Napoleon, a leader whose achievements and mistakes offer timeless lessons on power, ambition, and legacy. Chapter 1. Origins of a Legend. The rise of Napoleon Bonaparte is one of history's most captivating stories, but understanding the man behind the myth requires looking back to his roots. Born on August 15, 1769, in Ajaccio, Corsica, Napoleon's early life was shaped by the island's unique culture and by his family's own complex history. Corsica had only recently become a part of France after centuries of Genoese control, and many Corsicans, including Napoleon's family, held deep-rooted resentments towards the French administration. It was this fierce sense of Corsican identity, combined with a relentless drive to prove himself, that helped shape Napoleon's ambitious and complex character. 1.1 That family heritage and Corsican roots. Napoleon's father, Carlo Bonaparte, was a minor nobleman of Corsican Italian descent with strong political aspirations. The Bonaparte family had long supported Corsican independence, but with the island's annexation by France, Carlo's stance shifted, and he positioned himself as an ally to the French authorities. Despite this alignment, Carlo remained vocal about Corsican rights, a trait that would influence Napoleon's own paradoxical identity, a fierce patriot of Corsican ideals but, over time, deeply connected to France. Napoleon's mother, Letizia Ramolino, was known for her discipline and pragmatism. She raised her children to value strength, self-reliance, and resilience. Napoleon, the second of 8 children, formed a particularly close bond with Letizia, who instilled in him a stoic resilience that would become essential throughout his life. She was his anchor, a figure of both love and severity, and Napoleon would come to credit her strength as foundational to his own. 1.2. Education and early influences. In 1779, at the age of 10, Napoleon left Corsica to attend a military academy in mainland France. The Brienne Military School, located in Champagne, was rigorous, aristocratic, and distinctly French, characteristics that made young Napoleon feel like an outsider. His Corsican accent, his modest background compared to the aristocratic French students, and his fervent nationalist pride set him apart. However, he did not let these obstacles discourage him. Instead, Napoleon turned to books, particularly those on military strategy, philosophy, and history. He became particularly inspired by leaders such as Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great, men whose military prowess and commanding leadership he admired deeply. His studies also included works from Enlightenment thinkers like Rousseau, who shaped Napoleon's ideas about governance and the power of a strong state. During his time at Brienne, Napoleon was known for his solitude and seriousness. His teachers and peers described him as intelligent, introverted, and driven, a young man who seemed aware of his own potential. While he did not form many close friendships, Napoleon excelled in his studies, particularly in mathematics and military strategy, showing an early inclination towards the analytical thinking that would later make him a formidable military tactician. 1.3. The transition to the École militaire. Napoleon's academic performance and military aptitude earned him a place at the prestigious École militaire in Paris, where he began training as an artillery officer. The transition from Brienne to Paris marked a turning point in his life, exposing him to the intellectual and political turbulence of pre-revolutionary France. At École militaire, Napoleon immersed himself even deeper in the study of artillery, a branch of the military that required precision and skill, and which would soon give him a strategic advantage on the battlefield. Graduating at just 16, Napoleon's proficiency in artillery set him apart as one of the youngest officers in the French army. This achievement was all the more impressive given the deeply classist military hierarchy, which traditionally favored the aristocracy over young men of modest means. Yet, Napoleon's skill and ambition helped him bypass these barriers. However, his early years as an officer were not without challenges. He was often posted to remote and unpopular locations, including Valence and Auxonne, where he dealt with low-ranking duties and limited resources. These years of frustration and isolation only deepened his hunger for advancement. 1.4. Corsican politics and the influence of Pasquale Paoli. During his early career, Napoleon returned to Corsica several times and became embroiled in the island's complex political landscape. Corsica's independence movement, led by the revolutionary leader Pasquale Paoli, was in full swing. Napoleon admired Paoli's dedication to Corsican sovereignty, and his early writings and speeches reflect a nationalist spirit. He saw himself as a potential liberator of his homeland, torn between loyalty to Corsica and his new French identity. But Paoli, who had initially welcomed the young officer, began to distrust Napoleon, viewing his ambition and French affiliations as a betrayal of Corsican independence. This estrangement from Paoli marked a critical point in Napoleon's life, as he slowly shifted his identity from Corsican nationalist to French revolutionary. In the coming years, the increasingly tense situation in Corsica led to a permanent rift with Paoli, forcing Napoleon to leave the island and align himself fully with France. 1.5. The impact of the French Revolution on a young officer. By the time the French Revolution erupted in 1789, Napoleon had returned to France, where he observed the social and political upheaval with growing interest. The revolutionary ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity resonated with him, aligning with his personal ambitions and philosophical beliefs. The revolution was dismantling old hierarchies, creating opportunities for men of talent and drive to rise through the ranks regardless of their birth, a development that fit Napoleon's ambitions perfectly. The revolution was both a source of inspiration and a practical opportunity. With the aristocracy's diminishing power, Napoleon saw a pathway to prominence. As revolutionary fervor spread, the French military underwent massive restructuring, with many officers from noble families fleeing or losing their positions. This upheaval provided Napoleon with an unprecedented chance to ascend within the ranks, setting the stage for the rapid rise that would define his career in the coming decade. 1.6. Conclusion: a man on the verge of greatness. As the revolution continued to reshape France, Napoleon stood at a crossroads. He was a Corsican by birth but increasingly a Frenchman by choice. Driven by ambition, intellectual rigor, and a deep sense of destiny, he was poised to seize the opportunities presented by the shifting tides of history. The young officer, hardened by his experiences and sharpened by his studies, had the skills, the will, and the audacity to envision a future beyond the constraints of his modest background. Chapter 2: The Young Officer. Napoleon Bonaparte's early military career was a proving ground for his talent, tenacity, and relentless drive. With his education from Brienne and the École Militaire behind him, Napoleon entered the French army as a young artillery officer at a time when France was on the verge of social and political upheaval. The skills he honed in this period would not only earn him respect and promotion within military ranks but also place him on a path to historic power. From initial postings in remote garrisons to his first taste of leadership during the Siege of Toulon, Napoleon's early military years were marked by rapid learning, bold decision-making, and an unwavering determination to rise above his circumstances. 2.1. First assignments and early challenges. After completing his training, Napoleon received his first commission as a second lieutenant in an artillery regiment at Valence. His position was low-ranking, and life in Valence was often monotonous. Despite the limitations of his assignment, Napoleon threw himself into his duties with characteristic focus and dedication, meticulously studying artillery techniques, logistics, and fortifications. To pass the time, he continued his voracious reading habit, immersing himself in the works of classical and Enlightenment thinkers, which only fueled his ambitions. Napoleon's solitary nature and relentless work ethic set him apart from his peers. Though he was skilled in his duties, his Corsican heritage and lack of noble status left him an outsider among his fellow officers. Nevertheless, Napoleon quickly earned a reputation for his skill in artillery, a discipline that required both precision and intellectual rigor, qualities he possessed in abundance. Despite these early achievements, he felt underutilized and restless, eager for greater challenges that would allow him to demonstrate his strategic prowess. 2.2. The influence of artillery on Napoleon's strategy. From the start, Napoleon's specialization in artillery had a profound influence on his approach to warfare. Artillery was often seen as a secondary component in battles, used primarily to bombard enemy defenses from a distance. But Napoleon understood that a well-coordinated artillery force could be pivotal in shaping the outcome of battles, and he began to develop tactics that integrated artillery into the very core of his military strategies. Napoleon's innovative ideas about artillery would later become one of his greatest assets. He envisioned its potential to break enemy lines and support rapid advances, ideas he would eventually apply on a grand scale. His early experiences with artillery convinced him that battles could be won not just through manpower but through strategic positioning, logistics, and overwhelming firepower. These insights set him apart from his contemporaries and would later allow him to revolutionize warfare across Europe. 2.3. The French Revolution's impact on Napoleon's military career. The onset of the French Revolution in 1789 brought monumental changes to France, including its military structure. Traditional hierarchies were upended, and the aristocratic officer class was decimated as many noblemen fled or were executed. For Napoleon, the revolution's ideals of meritocracy presented an unprecedented opportunity. Suddenly, it was possible for men of skill and ambition, regardless of birth, to rise through the ranks. This shift played directly into Napoleon's hands. During these turbulent years, Napoleon's loyalty to the revolutionary ideals was complex but sincere. He was drawn to the ideas of liberty and equality, not only because they aligned with his personal ambition but because they resonated with his upbringing in a marginalized, Corsican family. The revolution ignited his patriotism for France, a nation now redefining itself, and he was determined to prove himself in its service. With many officers fleeing the army, opportunities arose for promotion, and Napoleon, driven by both ambition and a sense of destiny, seized these chances as they came. 2.4. The Siege of Toulon, Napoleon's first major victory. Napoleon's first true test of leadership and strategy came in 1793 during the Siege of Toulon. Toulon, a strategic port in southern France, had rebelled against the revolutionary government and invited British and Spanish forces to occupy the city. At the time, Napoleon was a captain in the artillery, assigned to assist with the siege. He quickly saw that the current strategies were ineffective, with French forces struggling to dislodge the entrenched foreign powers. Recognizing an opportunity, Napoleon proposed a bold plan to retake the city by concentrating artillery on a vital hill overlooking the port. His superiors allowed him to implement his strategy, and under his command, French artillery effectively disrupted the defenses and supply lines of the enemy forces. Napoleon's tactical ingenuity was instrumental in forcing the British and Spanish forces to withdraw from Toulon, securing a crucial victory for the revolutionary government. His success in Toulon garnered him praise and promotion to the rank of brigadier general at just 24 years old, a remarkable achievement that placed him on the path to greater responsibilities. 2.5. The Italian Campaign and Early Brilliance. After Toulon, Napoleon's reputation as a talented, resourceful officer grew, attracting the attention of influential figures within the revolutionary government. In 1796, he was appointed to command the French Army of Italy, a critical but poorly equipped force facing the armies of Austria and Piedmont. Despite limited resources, Napoleon accepted the challenge, determined to prove his abilities on the broader stage of European conflict. The Italian campaign was a turning point for Napoleon. Using a combination of audacious tactics, rapid maneuvers, and an intense focus on morale, he transformed his under-resourced army into a formidable fighting force. Napoleon emphasized speed, surprise, and decisive engagements, allowing his smaller force to outmaneuver and overwhelm the larger Austrian and Piedmontese armies. His charisma and confidence inspired loyalty and trust among his soldiers, who began to see him as a leader capable of defying the odds. The Italian campaign cemented Napoleon's reputation as a military genius. His victories in battles such as Montenotte, Lodi, and Rivoli shocked Europe and secured significant territorial gains for France. These successes not only elevated Napoleon's status within France but also marked him as a rising star on the European stage. By the end of the campaign, Napoleon had not only subdued northern Italy but had also positioned himself as a political and military figure of immense influence. 2.6. Love and Ambition. Marriage to Josephine. Amid his rising fame, Napoleon met and married Josephine de Beauharnais, a widow of noble descent with strong connections in Parisian society. Josephine's allure and social standing complemented Napoleon's ambitions, providing him with a social platform that opened doors within France's evolving political landscape. Their marriage was complex. Josephine's charm won Napoleon's heart, but her own ambitions and her initially ambivalent feelings for him introduced a degree of tension in their relationship. Nevertheless, Napoleon's devotion to Josephine remained intense, and he relied on her presence as he pursued his political and military goals. Josephine became an indispensable part of his life, albeit with complications that would later surface. Her connections proved invaluable in solidifying Napoleon's influence in Paris, helping him navigate the treacherous political waters of revolutionary France. However, their marriage also highlighted Napoleon's vulnerability and his desire for companionship amidst the pressures of his career. 2.7. The Egyptian Expedition and the Beginning of Legend. In 1798, Napoleon embarked on a new and highly ambitious campaign in Egypt. This was more than a military endeavor. It was an attempt to strike at British interests in the East and establish France as a power in the Mediterranean. The campaign initially saw great successes, with the French army capturing Alexandria and advancing into Cairo. However, the expedition also exposed Napoleon's limits. The British Navy, led by Admiral Horatio Nelson, destroyed the French fleet in the Battle of the Nile, cutting off Napoleon's forces from France and leaving them isolated. Despite the setbacks, Napoleon's time in Egypt added to his mystique. He cultivated an image of himself as a visionary leader, a man of culture and intellect, curious about Egypt's ancient civilization and engaged in scientific exploration. The French expedition included scientists, artists, and scholars who documented the region and laid the foundations for modern Egyptology. Although militarily the campaign was ultimately unsuccessful, it enhanced Napoleon's reputation as a bold, ambitious leader unafraid of risk. 2.8. Returning to France, the path to power. By 1799, with political instability mounting in France and the threat of foreign invasion looming, Napoleon returned from Egypt. His reputation as a military hero and visionary preceded him, and his popularity among the French people was at an all-time high. Disillusioned with the ineffective government of the Directory, Napoleon recognized the opportunity for change and his chance to claim power. Upon his return, Napoleon received a hero's welcome, but his ambitions went beyond mere acclaim. He began to align himself with political allies who shared his dissatisfaction with the Directory. Through careful maneuvering, he positioned himself as the leader capable of restoring stability and order to France. His sights were now set on an audacious goal, seizing control of the French government. 2.9. A leader ready to strike. As Napoleon prepared for his next steps, he was no longer just a young officer. He had become a national hero, a figure of hope for a country weary of revolution and conflict. His early military achievements, strategic brilliance, and growing political acumen had propelled him to the forefront of French society. Napoleon was ready to transcend the limitations of his role as a military leader and pursue a grander vision, one that would place him at the helm of France and, eventually, all of Europe. Chapter 3. The Coup of 18 Brumaire. The Coup of 18 Brumaire, November 9, 1799, marked a decisive turning point in French history and in the life of Napoleon Bonaparte. It was the moment that transformed him from a celebrated military general into a political powerhouse. In this chapter, we explore the political chaos of post-revolutionary France, the motivations and strategic maneuvering that led Napoleon to orchestrate a bold takeover, and the events of that pivotal day. This coup not only dissolved the ineffective Directory but also laid the foundations for Napoleon's rise as first consul, ultimately paving the way for his transformation into an emperor. 3.1. Political instability and the failing Directory. By the late 1790s, the French Republic was in a state of near collapse. The government, known as the Directory, had proven incapable of addressing the nation's economic struggles, political infighting, and internal unrest. France's military victories abroad contrasted sharply with the instability at home, where food shortages, inflation, and social divisions stoked resentment among the populace. Additionally, corruption and inefficiency plagued the government, with the Directory seen by many as a regime that lacked both vision and strength. The Directory's instability created a power vacuum, with various factions vying for control. Monarchists, Jacobins, and moderate Republicans all saw an opportunity to shape the future of France. However, none were capable of providing the stability that the nation desperately needed. This turbulent environment, coupled with the widespread disillusionment with the government, set the stage for a figure of strong leadership to emerge, someone who could restore order and inspire confidence. Napoleon, with his military fame and growing popularity, seemed uniquely suited for this role. 3.2. Napoleon's return from Egypt and rising popularity. Napoleon's unexpected return from Egypt in 1799 was both a personal gamble and a timely intervention. With France in turmoil, his military failures in Egypt were largely overshadowed by his past successes and his reputation as a hero. Upon his arrival, he was met with widespread admiration and praise. Napoleon's achievements in Italy, his charisma, and his perceived commitment to the revolutionary ideals had made him a beloved figure in the eyes of the French people. Capitalizing on this popularity, Napoleon began to surround himself with influential political allies, including Emmanuel Joseph Size, a member of the Directory who had become disillusioned with the current system. Size, an astute politician and thinker, recognized that Napoleon's popularity and military backing made him the ideal partner for a political coup. Together with Size and other key figures, Napoleon crafted a plan to dismantle the Directory and establish a new government. 3.3. The plan for the coup. The coup plan was meticulously crafted to appear legal and avoid the appearance of a violent overthrow, which could have jeopardized Napoleon's reputation. Size proposed restructuring the government into a three-member consulate, with Napoleon as one of the consuls, thus providing a semblance of continuity while placing real power in the hands of a few. Napoleon, however, had no intention of being an equal partner. His ambition was clear. He wanted not only a share of power but to dominate the new government. The date for the coup was set for 18 Brumaire, according to the French revolutionary calendar. Napoleon and his allies intended to use the Council of Elders and the Council of 500, the two legislative bodies of the Directory, to dissolve the existing government and create a new constitution. The plan called for Napoleon to use his influence over the military to secure control over Paris and ensure compliance from the reluctant legislators. 3.4. The day of the coup, 18 Brumaire. On the morning of 18 Brumaire, Napoleon's forces moved swiftly to secure key locations around Paris, including the legislative chambers at St. Cloud. By controlling the city's strategic points, Napoleon effectively limited any chance of resistance. As his troops positioned themselves around Paris, Napoleon and his co-conspirators pressured the members of the Council of Elders to declare a state of emergency, enabling them to transfer the legislative bodies outside of Paris and into the relatively isolated suburb of St. Cloud, ostensibly for security reasons. When Napoleon entered the Council of Elders, his presence was initially met with respect and a sense of awe. However, as he began to demand an end to the Directory, tensions quickly rose. Some legislators, fearing that they were witnessing a seizure of power, voiced their dissent, and Napoleon's speech faltered. He was not yet the charismatic orator that he would later become, and his frustration was apparent. Recognizing that the momentum was slipping, Napoleon's brother, Lucien Bonaparte, who was president of the Council of 500, intervened. Lucien declared that the council was under threat from terrorists and called in Napoleon's troops to restore order. At Lucien's urging, soldiers stormed into the Council of 500, forcibly ejecting those who opposed the coup. This display of military strength left no room for opposition, and the Council of Elders, faced with no viable alternatives, voted to dissolve the Directory. By the end of the day, the Directory was no more, and the consulate was established with Napoleon as first consul, effectively making him the head of state. 3.5. Aftermath of the coup, establishing the consulate. Following the coup, Napoleon moved swiftly to consolidate his power. With the Directory dissolved, he and his co-consuls, Size and Pierre-Roger Ducasse, began drafting a new constitution. The new government was ostensibly designed to maintain the principles of the revolution, with a system of checks and balances. In reality, however, the new constitution concentrated power in the hands of the first consul, giving Napoleon authority over foreign policy, the military, and internal administration. The other two consuls held only symbolic roles, providing Napoleon with near absolute control. Publicly, Napoleon justified the coup as a necessary intervention to save France from the anarchy of the Directory and to restore order. He positioned himself as a man of destiny, one who would lead France out of chaos and onto a path of stability and glory. His popularity surged, with many viewing him as a decisive leader capable of fulfilling the revolution's promise of security and prosperity. Napoleon was keenly aware of the importance of public perception and took steps to present the consulate as a legitimate government founded on the will of the people. In February 1800, a public referendum was held to ratify the new constitution, though the process was heavily managed to ensure favorable results. Overwhelmingly approved by the public, the constitution provided a veneer of legitimacy to Napoleon's authority. 3.6. The consolidation of power, first consul for life. Although the consulate was initially established with Napoleon as first consul for a term of 10 years, his ambition extended far beyond a temporary position. In 1802, he orchestrated a second referendum, this time to extend his consulship for life. Presented as a measure for continuity and stability, the referendum was approved, further entrenching Napoleon's control over France. With this move, he was no longer just a caretaker of the revolution. He was its sole leader, a position that placed him above all others in the political hierarchy. Napoleon's consolidation of power was not merely about personal ambition. He saw himself as the embodiment of the French state and the guarantor of its stability. His reforms, spanning education, law, and administration, were designed to create a strong, centralized government capable of resisting both internal division and foreign threats. The country was reorganized to reflect his vision of a unified, efficient state, bound together under his rule. 3.7. The Road to Empire, Seeds of Imperial Ambition. The transformation of Napoleon from first consul to emperor began with this initial consolidation of power. As he strengthened his hold on the government, Napoleon's vision for France expanded. He aspired not just to lead the Republic but to reshape Europe, promoting ideals of reform and modernization under French influence. This ambition would lead to a series of wars and political maneuvers that would extend France's reach across the continent. While the title of Emperor had not yet been declared, Napoleon's actions following the coup demonstrated a clear trajectory toward monarchy in all but name. He reinstated elements of ceremony and protocol that evoked the grandeur of previous regimes, blending revolutionary ideals with a distinctly autocratic style. His palace at the Tuileries became the center of political power, a symbol of his authority and an embodiment of the new French state. 3.8. Conclusion, the birth of a new era. The coup of 18 Brumaire marked the end of revolutionary chaos and the beginning of a new era under Napoleon's leadership. What had begun as a seizure of power soon evolved into a transformation of the French Republic itself. The new consulate regime provided the stability that the people craved, and Napoleon's decisive actions reinforced his image as the leader France needed. However, the coup also sowed the seeds of a paradox. Napoleon had gained power by dismantling the very ideals of equality and shared governance that the revolution had sought to uphold. In consolidating his authority, he had transformed from a servant of the people to a ruler with ambitions that extended far beyond republican ideals. Chapter 4. The Rise to Power. The years following the coup of 18 Brumaire saw Napoleon Bonaparte solidifying his grip on France with reforms that reached into every facet of French life. As first consul, Napoleon embarked on a mission to restructure the state, strengthen the economy, reform the legal system, and reshape French society. His vision extended beyond mere governance. Napoleon sought to transform France into a powerful, centralized state under his control. Through strategic reforms, political maneuvering, and a relentless drive, he steadily increased his authority, setting the stage for his eventual coronation as emperor. In this chapter, we delve into the key policies and events that define Napoleon's rise from first consul to emperor. 4.1. Consolidating power through the consulate. Napoleon's new constitution, implemented after the coup of 18 Brumaire, provided the framework for a government dominated by the first consul. Under this arrangement, Napoleon held the power to appoint and dismiss ministers, direct foreign policy, command the military, and control the legislative process. While the consulate included 2 other consuls, they served in largely advisory roles, allowing Napoleon near absolute control over the state. Napoleon was acutely aware that his rule would require popular support to remain stable. His reforms were therefore aimed at addressing key grievances of the French people, particularly those stemming from the economic instability and political corruption of the previous governments. He portrayed himself as a restorer of law and order, emphasizing that his leadership would bring peace and prosperity to a nation weary of revolution and war. To maintain this image, Napoleon's administration tightly controlled the press, restricting criticism and promoting his achievements. To legitimize his rule, Napoleon held a national plebiscite in 1800 to ratify the new constitution. The results, though managed to ensure a favorable outcome, showed overwhelming support for the consulate. This public endorsement strengthened Napoleon's position, allowing him to present himself as a leader chosen by the people. However, the plebiscite also marked the beginning of Napoleon's shift towards authoritarianism, as he increasingly relied on the power of his personality and the support of the military to sustain his rule. 4.2. Reforming the legal system, the Napoleonic Code. One of Napoleon's most enduring contributions to France was his comprehensive reform of the legal system, resulting in the creation of the Napoleonic Code. The French legal system had long been fragmented, with different regions governed by a patchwork of laws based on local customs, feudal practices, and inconsistent regulations. The Napoleonic Code, officially enacted in 1804, was a monumental effort to create a unified legal framework that would apply consistently across France. The code addressed various areas of civil law, including property rights, contracts, family law, and individual freedoms. It established principles of equality before the law, protection of private property, and secular governance, ideals inspired by the Revolution but grounded in Napoleon's vision of a disciplined society. Under the Code, all male citizens were granted equal legal rights, though it notably reinforced patriarchal authority within the family and restricted the rights of women. While the Code centralized authority under the state, it also provided a clear and accessible legal structure, contributing to social stability. The Napoleonic Code had an impact far beyond France's borders. As Napoleon's empire expanded, he introduced the code to other European countries, where it influenced legal systems for generations. Its emphasis on a standardized and accessible legal framework resonated with Enlightenment ideals and provided a foundation for modern civil law in much of Europe and the Americas. The Code remains one of Napoleon's most significant legacies, embodying both the revolutionary spirit of equality and his authoritarian approach to governance. 4.3. Financial and economic reforms. Recognizing that a stable economy was essential for a stable government, Napoleon implemented a series of financial reforms aimed at strengthening France's economy and restoring public confidence. The economic instability of the revolutionary period had left France with a weakened currency, high inflation, and widespread financial uncertainty. Napoleon tackled these issues head-on, establishing the Bank of France in 1800 to stabilize the currency, facilitate credit, and regulate the money supply. The bank became a cornerstone of French economic policy, providing a foundation for the financial stability that Napoleon needed to pursue his ambitious military and domestic agendas. In addition to stabilizing the currency, Napoleon introduced policies to encourage industrial growth and infrastructure development. He invested in the construction of roads, bridges, and canals, improving transportation networks and stimulating commerce. Napoleon's economic policies were designed to create a self-sufficient and prosperous France, capable of supporting his military campaigns and reinforcing his power. By promoting trade and industrialization, he not only strengthened the economy but also fostered a sense of national pride and unity. Napoleon also reformed the tax system, introducing a more efficient method of tax collection that reduced corruption and ensured a steady revenue stream for the state. He appointed professional tax collectors, eliminating the old system of tax farming that had allowed intermediaries to exploit taxpayers. These fiscal policies contributed to the emergence of a strong centralized state, with Napoleon firmly in control of both the economy and the government. 4.4. Reorganizing education and propagating ideals. Education was another critical aspect of Napoleon's vision for France. He believed that a well-educated population would strengthen the state and foster a sense of loyalty and unity. In 1802, he established the lycées, a network of secondary schools designed to train young men for careers in government, the military, and other essential fields. These schools emphasized a curriculum that promoted discipline, patriotism, and respect for authority, values that Napoleon saw as essential for a stable society. The lycées were part of a broader effort to promote Napoleonic ideals throughout French society. By standardizing education and focusing on subjects that reinforced state authority, Napoleon sought to create a loyal and capable administrative class that would support his government. His emphasis on secular education also reflected his commitment to reducing the influence of the Catholic Church, which he saw as a rival for authority over the people. Napoleon's educational reforms extended beyond the lycées. He also established technical schools to train engineers, scientists, and professionals in fields that would support France's industrial and military ambitions. This focus on practical education aligned with his vision of a modern, self-sufficient nation. The emphasis on state-sponsored education helped to solidify Napoleon's control over the intellectual and ideological development of French society, ensuring that future generations would be shaped by his values and policies. 4.5. Religion and the Concordat with the Catholic Church. Although Napoleon was not deeply religious, he understood the importance of the Catholic Church in French society and the potential for religion to serve as a tool for social cohesion. The revolutionary period had severely damaged the relationship between the state and the church, with the revolutionary government seizing church property, persecuting clergy, and instituting secular policies. Napoleon recognized that restoring relations with the church could help stabilize the country and win support from religious citizens. In 1801, Napoleon negotiated the Concordat with Pope Pius VII, re-establishing Catholicism as the religion of the majority of French citizens while maintaining the state's authority over the church. The Concordat allowed the church to reopen its churches, appoint clergy with state approval, and regain some influence over the population. However, Napoleon retained control over church appointments and ensured that religious leaders remained loyal to the state. The Concordat was a pragmatic solution that appeased Catholics without undermining the state's authority, helping to create a more unified and stable France. 4.6. Military reforms and the Grand Army. As first consul, Napoleon continued to expand and reform the French military, building what would become known as the Grande Armée, or Grand Army. He believed that a powerful and disciplined military was essential not only for defense but for the realization of his ambitions on the European stage. His military reforms focused on improving training, logistics, and organization, creating a professional standing army capable of rapid mobilization and effective engagement. Napoleon introduced a conscription system that required all able-bodied men to serve in the army, providing a steady supply of recruits and fostering a sense of national duty. This system enabled France to field large armies, giving Napoleon a significant advantage over his rivals. The Grande Armée was organized into corps, each capable of independent action and led by trusted generals who followed Napoleon's strategic vision. This corps structure allowed for flexibility and coordination on the battlefield, making the French army one of the most formidable forces in Europe. Under Napoleon's command, the military became a powerful symbol of French pride and strength, uniting the people around the ideals of national honor and glory. His reputation as a brilliant military strategist attracted young men from across France, eager to serve under his leadership. The Grande Armée would go on to achieve remarkable victories, expanding French influence and establishing Napoleon as the dominant force in Europe. 4.7. The Road to Empire, Napoleon's crowning as emperor. By 1804, Napoleon's power had grown to such an extent that he felt ready to take the ultimate step, declaring himself Emperor of the French. This move was a culmination of his ambition and the natural progression of his authority. He framed his decision as a means of ensuring stability and continuity for France, portraying himself as a protector of the nation's achievements and a defender against foreign threats. In a symbolic break from tradition, Napoleon invited Pope Pius VII to preside over his coronation but placed the crown on his own head, a powerful statement of his independence and authority. The coronation, held in the grand setting of Notre Dame Cathedral, marked the formal beginning of the Napoleonic Empire. With this act, Napoleon officially transitioned from revolutionary hero to monarch, blending the revolutionary ideals of the Republic with the grandeur of empire. His title of Emperor of the French emphasized that he ruled not as a king by divine right but as a leader chosen by the people, a claim reinforced by a third plebiscite that overwhelmingly approved his elevation to emperor. Napoleon's crowning signaled the end of the French Republic and the beginning of a new era. While some viewed his ascension as a betrayal of revolutionary ideals, many in France celebrated him as a leader who had restored order and brought the nation glory. His empire, however, was not merely a domestic construct. It was an assertion of France's place as a dominant power in Europe, with Napoleon at its helm. 4.8. Conclusion: the emperor's vision and the empire's foundations. Napoleon's rise to power was a blend of personal ambition, strategic brilliance, and genuine commitment to reform. By consolidating his authority through political, economic, legal, and military reforms, he established a centralized state that bore the unmistakable stamp of his influence. His transformation from first consul to emperor was marked by a calculated blend of popular support and autocratic power, a combination that would define the Napoleonic Empire. As emperor, Napoleon was poised to embark on a campaign to expand French influence across Europe, driven by his vision of a unified continent under his leadership. But the years ahead would test his ambitions, as he faced both domestic challenges and the rising opposition of European powers. The foundations he had laid during his years as first consul would support his empire, but his quest for supremacy would ultimately bring him into conflict with nearly every major power in Europe. Chapter 5. Napoleon's Grand Empire. With his coronation as emperor in 1804, Napoleon Bonaparte set out to realize his vision of a vast European empire unified under French rule. His ambition was not only to establish France as the preeminent power in Europe but also to spread the revolutionary principles of equality, law, and order throughout the continent. Napoleon's empire, however, was not built on diplomacy alone. It relied on military conquests, strategic alliances, and an intricate web of political manipulation. The following chapter delves into Napoleon's grand imperial project, the relentless expansion of the French Empire, the key battles that defined this era, and the alliances and rivalries that shaped the geopolitical landscape of Europe. 5.1. Foundations of the Grand Empire. The French Empire, at its height, extended across much of Europe. Napoleon sought not only to consolidate control over France's immediate neighbors but to create a series of satellite states that would serve as buffer zones, protecting France from potential invasions and reinforcing his authority. Through military campaigns and diplomatic negotiations, Napoleon restructured much of the continent, replacing old monarchies with leaders loyal to him, often from within his own family. His brothers, sisters, and loyal generals were appointed as kings and governors of newly conquered territories, forming a network of semi-autonomous states under French influence. This strategy of installing family members as rulers served two purposes. It ensured loyalty to the Napoleonic regime and helped spread the French system of governance. In many of these regions, Napoleon introduced reforms based on the Napoleonic Code, promoting secular government, standardized laws, and social reforms inspired by revolutionary ideals. These changes modernized many parts of Europe, particularly in Italy, the German states, and the Duchy of Warsaw. However, these reforms were not always welcomed, as they often clashed with local customs and traditions, sparking resistance among the populace. The Grand Empire was structured around three tiers. France and its directly annexed territories formed the core, followed by the dependent kingdoms ruled by Napoleon's allies, and finally, the loosely affiliated states that pledged allegiance to France but retained some autonomy. This structure allowed Napoleon to project his influence far beyond France's borders, creating a vast, interconnected empire that spanned from the Iberian Peninsula to the Russian frontier. 5.2. The Coalition Wars and the Drive for Dominance. The expansion of Napoleon's empire did not come without fierce opposition. His ambitions were met with repeated resistance from coalitions of European powers, notably Great Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia. These countries, alarmed by France's growing dominance, formed a series of coalitions to counteract Napoleon's advances. Between 1803 and 1815, Europe was locked in nearly continuous conflict, with Napoleon's forces clashing with coalition armies in a series of wars known as the Napoleonic Wars. One of the defining battles of this period was the Battle of Austerlitz in 1805, also known as the Battle of the Three Emperors. Facing the combined forces of Austria and Russia, Napoleon achieved a decisive victory, which is often regarded as one of his greatest military triumphs. By exploiting the weaknesses in the coalition's positioning and employing innovative tactics, he secured a resounding victory that solidified his control over Central Europe. Following Austerlitz, Napoleon's prestige as a military strategist reached new heights, and Austria was forced to sign the Treaty of Pressburg, ceding significant territories to France. However, the coalition wars also underscored the limits of Napoleon's power. Great Britain, with its formidable navy, remained a constant thorn in Napoleon's side, using its naval supremacy to disrupt French trade and support resistance movements across Europe. Unable to match Britain at sea, Napoleon responded with the continental system, a massive economic blockade intended to weaken Britain by cutting off its trade with Europe. However, the continental system ultimately proved costly and difficult to enforce, straining France's relations with its allies and leading to widespread smuggling and economic hardship in Europe. 5.3. The Continental System and Economic Warfare. Napoleon's continental system was one of his most ambitious strategies, designed to strike at Britain's economic lifeblood. By prohibiting European nations under his control or influence from trading with Britain, Napoleon hoped to cripple the British economy and force them to negotiate peace on his terms. Initially, the blockade seemed promising as it disrupted British exports and created opportunities for French industries to expand in a protected market. However, enforcing the continental system proved to be an immense challenge. Many of Napoleon's allies and satellite states, particularly those that relied on British goods, resented the restrictions and sought ways to bypass them. Smuggling became rampant, and British goods continued to find their way into Europe through neutral ports and black markets. The economic hardship caused by the blockade also sparked resentment among ordinary citizens, as prices rose and shortages became common. The continental system strained Napoleon's relationships with key allies, especially Russia, which suffered economically due to the loss of its lucrative trade with Britain. This tension would eventually lead to a breakdown in Franco-Russian relations and set the stage for the disastrous Russian campaign in 1812. The continental system, rather than weakening Britain, ultimately contributed to the isolation of Napoleon's empire and exacerbated the economic challenges facing his regime. 5.4. Reshaping Europe, the Confederation of the Rhine and the Kingdom of Italy. One of Napoleon's most significant achievements in his quest to reshape Europe was the creation of the Confederation of the Rhine in 1806. The Confederation was a coalition of German states that declared independence from the Holy Roman Empire and aligned themselves with France. In doing so, Napoleon effectively dissolved the Holy Roman Empire, which had dominated Central Europe for centuries. The new confederation not only provided a buffer between France and its eastern rivals but also brought German territories under French influence, allowing Napoleon to introduce administrative and legal reforms. In Italy, Napoleon established the Kingdom of Italy, which he ruled as king. He implemented sweeping reforms, abolishing feudal privileges, secularizing the state, and promoting economic modernization. These changes, while beneficial to the emerging middle class, often alienated the traditional elites and the Catholic Church, creating pockets of resistance. The Kingdom of Italy became an important part of the French Empire, serving as both a source of revenue and a launching point for military campaigns in the Mediterranean and Central Europe. By creating the Confederation of the Rhine and the Kingdom of Italy, Napoleon further solidified his control over Europe, weakening the influence of Austria and consolidating a network of states that would support his campaigns. These territories not only provided strategic depth but also served as testing grounds for Napoleon's reforms, which spread the ideals of the Napoleonic Code and centralized governance throughout the continent. 5.5. The Peninsular War and the Spanish Resistance. In 1808, Napoleon faced one of the most prolonged and difficult conflicts of his career, the Peninsular War in Spain and Portugal. Initially, Napoleon sought to secure Spain as a loyal ally by placing his brother, Joseph Bonaparte, on the Spanish throne. However, the Spanish people fiercely resisted this foreign imposition, sparking a brutal and protracted war of attrition that would stretch French resources thin. The Peninsular War became a drain on Napoleon's military and economic strength. The Spanish resistance, supported by Britain, utilized guerrilla warfare tactics, ambushing French forces and targeting supply lines. This form of resistance was effective and demoralizing, as French forces found themselves constantly under threat from an enemy that was difficult to locate and neutralize. The war also galvanized a sense of Spanish nationalism, uniting the people against the occupying forces and fueling anti-French sentiment. The Peninsular War marked a significant turning point in Napoleon's empire. The strain on French resources and the ongoing military commitments in Spain weakened his position in Europe, diverting troops and supplies that could have been used elsewhere. Additionally, the Peninsular War demonstrated the limits of Napoleon's power, showing that not all nations would accept French rule and that local resistance could pose a serious threat to his grand imperial ambitions. 5.6. The Russian Campaign, a fatal gamble. In 1812, tensions between Napoleon and Tsar Alexander I of Russia reached a breaking point. Frustrated by Russia's violations of the continental system and determined to enforce his dominance over Europe, Napoleon launched an ambitious invasion of Russia. The campaign was one of the most significant and ultimately disastrous events of his reign. Napoleon assembled the Grande Army, a massive force of over 600,000 soldiers from across his empire, and marched into Russian territory. However, the Russian army employed a strategy of attrition, retreating deep into the country and drawing Napoleon's forces further away from their supply lines. The Russians also utilized scorched earth tactics, destroying crops, livestock, and resources as they retreated, leaving the Grande Army without adequate supplies. When Napoleon finally reached Moscow, he found the city largely abandoned and burning. With winter approaching and supplies dwindling, he was forced to order a retreat. The retreat from Moscow turned into a nightmare, as the harsh Russian winter, combined with constant attacks from Russian forces, decimated the Grande Army. By the time the remnants of the army crossed back into French-held territory, only a fraction of the original force remained. The Russian campaign marked the beginning of Napoleon's downfall, as it severely weakened his military and exposed the vulnerability of his empire. 5.7. The Sixth Coalition and the Fall of Paris. The catastrophic losses in Russia emboldened Napoleon's enemies. In 1813, a coalition of European powers, including Russia, Prussia, Austria, and Sweden, formed the Sixth Coalition to confront Napoleon. The coalition armies advanced into Central Europe, and despite Napoleon's efforts to rally his remaining forces, he faced a series of defeats in battles such as Leipzig, also known as the Battle of Nations. By early 1814, coalition forces advanced into France, and for the first time, Napoleon's enemies were on French soil. The French people, weary of years of war and economic hardship, were losing faith in their emperor. In March 1814, Paris fell to the coalition forces, marking the first time the city had been captured in centuries. Facing overwhelming odds and a disillusioned populace, Napoleon was forced to abdicate in April 1814, ending his rule as Emperor of the French. 5.8. The Rise and Decline of the Grand Empire. Napoleon's Grand Empire, once the dominant force in Europe, ultimately collapsed under the weight of its own ambition. While he had reshaped the continent, spreading ideals of reform and governance that would influence generations, his relentless expansion and unyielding drive for dominance led to his downfall. The Russian campaign, the resistance in Spain, and the coalition wars had drained his empire of its resources and morale, leaving it vulnerable to external attack and internal dissent. In retrospect, Napoleon's empire was as much a product of the revolutionary ideals he once championed as it was a testament to his personal ambition. His vision of a unified Europe under French influence remains one of history's most remarkable, albeit flawed, political projects. The Grand Empire would leave a lasting legacy, with the Napoleonic Code and his administrative reforms continuing to shape modern Europe. However, Napoleon's fall demonstrated the limits of authoritarian ambition and the perils of overextension, offering a lesson in the balance of power and the complexities of empire building. Chapter 6. The Napoleonic Code. The Napoleonic Code, officially known as the Civil Code of the French, stands as one of Napoleon Bonaparte's most lasting and influential achievements. Enacted in 1804, it marked a monumental shift in legal philosophy, merging the ideals of the French Revolution with practical governance. Napoleon's vision was clear: to create a legal system based on equality, secularism, and uniformity that would unify and stabilize French society while eliminating the vestiges of feudalism and aristocratic privilege. Beyond its immediate impact in France, the Napoleonic Code laid the foundations for legal systems across Europe and Latin America, cementing Napoleon's influence long after his empire had faded. This chapter delves into the origins, structure, and global impact of the Napoleonic Code, exploring how it embodied both revolutionary ideals and Napoleon's authoritarian vision. 6.1. The need for legal reform in revolutionary France. Before the Revolution, France's legal system was notoriously fragmented. It consisted of a patchwork of customary laws, feudal regulations, church decrees, and royal edicts, differing widely from one region to another. This inconsistency bred confusion and injustice, with commoners and aristocrats often held to different standards, especially regarding property rights and obligations. Additionally, religious influence over family and inheritance laws often conflicted with the revolutionary principles of equality and secular governance. The French Revolution aimed to dismantle these feudal structures, but even after years of political upheaval, the country lacked a cohesive legal framework. The revolution's initial attempts to reform the legal system were interrupted by the Reign of Terror and the instability that followed, leaving France in dire need of a unified code of laws. Napoleon recognized that a modern, standardized legal code would not only bring order but would also consolidate his control over France, uniting the nation under a single, authoritative framework. 6.2. Drafting the Code, a Herculean task. In 1800, Napoleon appointed a commission of 4 legal experts: Jean-Étienne-Marie Portalis, Jacques de Mailleville, Félix-Julien-Jean Bigot de Priaminu, and François-Denis Tronchet, to draft the new civil code. These men were tasked with creating a legal system that would be fair, secular, and applicable to all citizens regardless of social class or regional background. Over the next 4 years, they painstakingly crafted the code, meeting regularly to debate and refine its provisions. Napoleon himself took an active role in the discussions, attending sessions, reviewing drafts, and intervening in disputes to ensure that the code reflected his vision. The Napoleonic Code was grounded in principles of rationality and practicality, drawing inspiration from Roman law, Enlightenment philosophy, and the values of the French Revolution. The drafting process involved extensive consultation with legal scholars, magistrates, and other experts to ensure that the code would be both comprehensive and accessible. While it retained some aspects of traditional law, such as property rights and contracts, it reformed or abolished feudal privileges and aligned French law with the values of modern citizenship. 6.3. Structure and key principles of the Napoleonic Code. The Napoleonic Code was organized into 3 main sections: personal law, property law, and contract law. Each section was designed to address fundamental aspects of civil life in a way that was clear and uniform, making the law more accessible to the average citizen. 1. Personal law. This section established the principles of individual equality and secular governance. It regulated marriage, divorce, paternal authority, and inheritance, marking a significant shift from church-dominated family law. While the code enshrined the idea of equality before the law, it also reinforced a patriarchal structure by giving fathers control over the family and limiting the legal rights of women. 2. Property law. This section protected private property rights, a crucial element of the post-revolutionary society. Property ownership was seen as a fundamental right, and the code established clear rules for property acquisition, ownership, and transfer. By reinforcing property rights, Napoleon aimed to create a stable, land-owning middle class that would support his regime and contribute to the nation's prosperity. 3. Contract law. The Napoleonic Code emphasized the freedom of contract, allowing individuals to engage in legal agreements without interference from the state. This principle promoted economic growth and encouraged entrepreneurship, aligning with Napoleon's broader economic reforms. The code defined the rules governing contracts, liability, and obligations, ensuring that agreements were enforceable and predictable. The Napoleonic Code was revolutionary in its simplicity and clarity, with a language that was direct and comprehensible, in stark contrast to the convoluted legal jargon of previous laws. This accessibility was one of the code's most important features, as it allowed ordinary citizens to understand their rights and obligations, fostering a sense of justice and equality. 6.4. Balancing equality and authority. While the Napoleonic Code championed equality before the law, it also reflected Napoleon's authoritarian values, particularly in its approach to family and social order. Although the code abolished aristocratic privileges and feudal rights, it did not extend full legal equality to women. Wives were legally subordinate to their husbands, who retained authority over the family, including control of marital property and decision-making rights over children. Women were restricted from signing contracts, filing lawsuits, or managing their own finances without their husband's consent. Napoleon justified these restrictions as necessary for social stability, arguing that strong patriarchal authority within the family would support a disciplined, orderly society. This aspect of the code has been widely criticized, as it reinforced gender inequality even as it promoted equality among men. While the code embodied the ideals of liberty and equality in many respects, it also enshrined traditional social hierarchies, reflecting Napoleon's desire for a society that was orderly and loyal to his rule. 6.5. Implementing the code, challenges and successes. The implementation of the Napoleonic Code was a significant administrative challenge. To enforce the code uniformly across France, Napoleon reorganized the judicial system, creating a network of courts and appointing trained judges who could interpret the code consistently. He also established a system of legal education, ensuring that future generations of judges and lawyers were well-versed in the principles of the new code. This institutional framework contributed to the stability and effectiveness of the code, providing France with a professional judiciary and a legal system that functioned independently of political whims. Initially, the code encountered resistance from conservative factions, particularly in rural areas where traditional customs still held sway. However, the benefits of a standardized, predictable legal system quickly became apparent, winning over skeptics and fostering a sense of national unity. For the first time, French citizens, regardless of their region, class, or background, were subject to the same laws, reinforcing the revolutionary ideals of equality and justice. 6.6. The global impact of the Napoleonic Code. The influence of the Napoleonic Code extended far beyond France's borders, as it served as a model for legal systems across Europe and Latin America. As Napoleon's armies expanded into Italy, the German states, Belgium, the Netherlands, and beyond, they carried the code with them, introducing it to territories under French control. In many cases, the code replaced outdated feudal laws, bringing about significant social and economic modernization in line with Enlightenment principles. In countries such as Italy, Spain, and parts of Germany, the Napoleonic Code inspired local legal reforms even after Napoleon's empire collapsed. Its emphasis on civil rights, property protection, and secular governance resonated with reformers who sought to establish modern, democratic states. In Latin America, revolutionary leaders who admired Napoleon, such as Simón Bolívar, adapted the principles of the code to fit their own struggles for independence, shaping the legal frameworks of emerging nations across the continent. Today, the Napoleonic Code remains the foundation of civil law systems in numerous countries, particularly in Europe, Latin America, and parts of Africa. Its enduring influence attests to the power of Napoleon's vision and the adaptability of the Code's principles to diverse cultural contexts. By codifying the ideals of the revolution in a way that was practical, accessible, and modern, Napoleon left a legal legacy that has stood the test of time. 6.7. The Code's limitations and controversies. Despite its successes, the Napoleonic Code has not been without criticism. Its treatment of women and minorities reflected the social biases of the time, embedding gender inequality into the legal framework. Critics argue that the Code's restrictions on women's rights contradicted its principles of equality and justice, highlighting a fundamental tension between revolutionary ideals and Napoleon's conservative social views. These limitations have led to numerous reforms in subsequent decades, as societies around the world have sought to address these inequities and expand civil rights for all citizens. The Code's emphasis on property rights also favored the emerging bourgeoisie, sometimes at the expense of the working class. By prioritizing individual ownership and economic freedom, the Code contributed to the growth of capitalism, but it did little to address social inequality or labor rights. This focus on property and contract law reflected Napoleon's desire to build a strong middle class that would support his government, but it left significant gaps in protections for the most vulnerable members of society. 6.8. Conclusion: the lasting legacy of the Napoleonic Code. The Napoleonic Code stands as a testament to Napoleon's ability to blend revolutionary ideals with practical governance, creating a legal system that balanced individual rights with social order. Although it was not perfect, the Code represented a transformative shift toward equality, rationality, and secular governance. It simplified and standardized the law, making justice more accessible and transparent for French citizens and laying the groundwork for modern legal systems across the world. In many ways, the Napoleonic Code encapsulates the dual nature of Napoleon's rule, a visionary leader who championed progressive reforms while enforcing his own authoritarian values. His legal legacy, enshrined in the Code, continues to influence contemporary legal thought, shaping notions of citizenship, civil rights, and the relationship between the individual and the state. As we move forward, we will see how Napoleon's ambitions extended beyond France's borders, leading him to seek dominance over Europe through a series of military campaigns that would define his reign. The next chapter will explore Napoleon's military strategies, his expansionist policies, and the grand vision that ultimately led to both his greatest triumphs and his ultimate downfall. Chapter 7. The Russian Campaign. In 1812, Napoleon Bonaparte embarked on his most ambitious and fateful military campaign, the invasion of Russia. The campaign was driven by Napoleon's frustration with Tsar Alexander I of Russia, who had abandoned the continental system, a blockade meant to cripple Britain economically by cutting off trade with Europe. Napoleon believed that enforcing this system was essential to maintaining his dominance over Europe, and he saw Russia's defiance as a direct threat to his authority. However, what began as a mission to enforce loyalty and secure his empire would end in disaster, weakening his military, destabilizing his rule, and marking the beginning of his eventual downfall. This chapter delves into the motivations, strategies, key battles, and tragic miscalculations of the Russian campaign, exploring how Napoleon's hubris led to one of the most catastrophic defeats in military history. 7.1. Prelude to the Invasion: the breakdown of Franco-Russian relations. Napoleon and Tsar Alexander I initially formed an alliance after the Treaty of Tilsit in 1807, an agreement that had temporarily stabilized relations between France and Russia. However, the alliance was tenuous, built on mutual interests rather than genuine trust. Napoleon's continental system, which barred European nations from trading with Britain, placed significant economic strain on Russia, as the Russian economy was heavily reliant on trade with Britain for essential goods and revenue. Frustrated by the economic impact of the blockade, Alexander I began to openly defy the continental system, undermining Napoleon's influence in Europe. The rift deepened as Napoleon expanded his influence across the continent. His creation of the Grand Duchy of Warsaw on Russia's western border was viewed as a direct threat by the Russian government, stirring fears that Napoleon intended to resurrect a powerful Polish state at Russia's expense. Furthermore, Napoleon's insistence on marrying into European royalty, particularly his marriage to Marie-Louise of Austria in 1810, signaled to Alexander that Napoleon was consolidating his power within Europe's royal circles, potentially at Russia's expense. By 1812, relations between France and Russia had deteriorated to the point of open hostility, and Napoleon saw war as the only means to reassert his control. 7.2. The Grand Army, a force assembled for conquest. To achieve his objectives, Napoleon assembled the Grande Army, the largest military force he had ever commanded. Numbering over 600,000 troops, the Grande Army was composed of soldiers from across Napoleon's empire, including French, Polish, German, Italian, and Dutch contingents. This vast force was well-equipped and battle-hardened, and Napoleon believed it would be more than sufficient to subdue Russia and compel Tsar Alexander to return to the fold. However, the sheer size of the Grande Army presented significant logistical challenges. Supplying an army of this magnitude required an extensive supply chain, stretching across Eastern Europe and into Russia's vast and inhospitable terrain. Napoleon's strategy relied on the ability to live off the land, expecting Russian resources to sustain his troops as they advanced. Yet the Russians, familiar with their own harsh environment, prepared a strategy that would deny Napoleon this advantage and slowly wear down his forces. 7.3. The invasion begins, crossing the Niemen River. On June 24, 1812, Napoleon's Grande Army crossed the Niemen River into Russian territory, marking the beginning of the invasion. Initially, the French encountered little resistance, as Russian forces strategically retreated rather than engaging in a full-scale battle. This tactic puzzled and frustrated Napoleon, who was accustomed to decisive battles that would allow him to quickly establish dominance. The Russian army, under the command of General Mikhail Barclay de Tolly, adopted a strategy of withdrawal, drawing the French deeper into Russian territory. As the Grande Army advanced, the Russians employed a scorched earth policy, systematically destroying crops, villages, and supplies as they retreated. This tactic deprived Napoleon's army of the resources they expected to find, forcing them to rely on an overstretched supply chain and hastening the depletion of their provisions. The summer heat and poor roads added to the challenges, with soldiers suffering from exhaustion, hunger, and disease as they marched deeper into Russia. Napoleon's strategy of rapid, decisive warfare was thwarted by the Russians' refusal to meet him in open battle, setting the stage for a protracted and grueling campaign. 7.4. The Battle of Borodino, a Pyrrhic victory. By early September, Napoleon's forces approached the town of Borodino, about 70 miles west of Moscow. The Russian army, now commanded by General Mikhail Kutuzov, had fortified positions around Borodino, preparing for a major confrontation. On September 7, 1812, the two armies clashed in one of the bloodiest battles of the Napoleonic Wars, with over 250,000 soldiers fighting in a brutal, day-long engagement. The Battle of Borodino was a costly affair for both sides. After a fierce struggle, Napoleon managed to secure a tactical victory, but at a devastating cost. The Grande Army suffered over 30,000 casualties, while the Russians lost an estimated 45,000 men. Despite the high casualties, the Russian army was not defeated. Instead, they continued their retreat, leaving the road to Moscow open to the French. While Napoleon had won the battle, it was a Pyrrhic victory, as his army was severely weakened and morale began to wane. Borodino revealed the limitations of Napoleon's strategy in Russia. Unlike his previous campaigns in Europe, where quick, decisive battles had led to victory, the Russians' willingness to absorb massive losses without surrender forced Napoleon into a war of attrition. The lack of a definitive victory at Borodino and the continued resistance of the Russian army foreshadowed the challenges that lay ahead. 7.5. The occupation of Moscow and the scorched city. On September 14, 1812, Napoleon and the Grande Army entered Moscow, expecting it to be a turning point in the campaign. He anticipated that the capture of Russia's symbolic capital would force Alexander to negotiate peace. However, upon arrival, Napoleon was met with an eerie silence. The city had been largely abandoned by its inhabitants, and within days, fires broke out across Moscow, devastating much of the city. Historians believe that the fires were deliberately set by Russian authorities to deny Napoleon the resources he needed. The burning of Moscow left Napoleon in a desperate situation. With winter approaching and no sign of a Russian surrender, Napoleon faced a critical decision: to wait in Moscow, hoping for a peace offer, or to retreat and preserve what was left of his army. He lingered in Moscow for over a month, hoping in vain for Tsar Alexander to negotiate. But Alexander, determined to continue the resistance, refused to capitulate. The destruction of Moscow and the onset of winter forced Napoleon's hand. Realizing that he could not sustain his army in a ruined city, he ordered a retreat in mid-October, reluctantly abandoning Moscow and beginning the long, harrowing journey back to France. This decision marked the beginning of one of the most tragic chapters in military history, as the Grande Army faced starvation, freezing temperatures, and relentless Russian attacks on their way back to French territory. 7.6. The retreat from Moscow, the winter of death. The retreat from Moscow quickly descended into a nightmare. The Russian winter struck with brutal intensity, bringing temperatures as low as -30 degrees Celsius, -22 Fahrenheit. Lacking adequate winter clothing and supplies, Napoleon's soldiers suffered immensely. Frostbite, starvation, and disease took a staggering toll, and the columns of soldiers became increasingly disorganized as discipline broke down. Horses perished in droves, leaving soldiers to trudge through snow and ice on foot, many falling dead along the way. As the French soldiers retreated, Russian forces, including regular troops and Cossack cavalry, harassed them relentlessly. The Russian army cut off stragglers, ambushed small groups, and attacked the rear guard, turning the retreat into a deadly game of survival. For the Grande Army, the journey back to France became a fight for survival, with soldiers facing not only Russian attacks but also the merciless Russian winter. By the time Napoleon reached the Berezina River in late November, his army had been reduced to a fraction of its original size. The crossing of the Berezina, under continuous Russian fire, resulted in further casualties, with thousands of soldiers and civilians perishing as they attempted to cross the ice-choked river. The crossing of the Berezina became symbolic of the horrific losses suffered during the retreat, marking the collapse of the once mighty Grande Army. 7.7. Napoleon's return to Paris and the aftermath of the campaign. In December 1812, Napoleon abandoned his remaining troops and hurried back to Paris, where he faced a new threat: political instability and the possibility of revolt. The disastrous outcome of the Russian campaign had shaken Napoleon's regime to its core, and news of the defeat spread quickly, undermining his authority and emboldening his enemies. In Paris, Napoleon attempted to project strength, downplaying the extent of the losses and focusing on rebuilding his forces. However, the impact of the Russian campaign could not be ignored. Out of the more than 600,000 soldiers who had set out for Russia, fewer than 100,000 returned. The catastrophic losses left France vulnerable, with its military power severely diminished. The Russian campaign marked the beginning of the end for Napoleon's empire, as his enemies, recognizing his weakened state, prepared to form a new coalition to challenge his dominance. The psychological impact of the campaign was profound, both on Napoleon and on the French people. The invincible image of Napoleon had been shattered, and his aura of inevitability was gone. The campaign not only exposed the limits of his military prowess but also revealed the dangers of unchecked ambition, as his desire for control over Europe had led him to the unforgiving wilderness of Russia. 7.8 Legacy of the Russian Campaign. The beginning of the end. The Russian campaign marked a turning point in the Napoleonic Wars and is often seen as the beginning of Napoleon's downfall. The campaign highlighted the limits of his power, showing that even his formidable military skills and relentless ambition were not enough to conquer the vast, harsh terrain of Russia. The loss of the Grande Army weakened his empire and emboldened his enemies, leading to the formation of the Sixth Coalition, which would confront him in a final struggle for control of Europe. The Russian campaign also serves as a lesson in the perils of overreach and the unpredictability of warfare. Napoleon's decision to invade Russia, driven by pride and a desire for absolute control, ultimately cost him his empire. The campaign became a symbol of the dangers inherent in unchecked ambition and the consequences of underestimating one's adversaries. Historians and military strategists continue to study the Russian campaign as an example of the complexities of logistics, the importance of understanding geography and climate, and the limits of even the most powerful armies. 7.9 Conclusion. A shattered empire and a broken leader. The Russian campaign left Napoleon's empire in shambles and marked the beginning of a downward spiral from which he would never fully recover. The defeat in Russia shattered his aura of invincibility and left his empire vulnerable to external threats and internal dissent. The loss of the Grande Army deprived Napoleon of the military might he needed to maintain his hold on Europe, and in the years that followed, his enemies would seize the opportunity to challenge him. Chapter 8. The Fall of an Emperor. Following the catastrophic defeat in Russia, Napoleon Bonaparte's once mighty empire was on the brink of collapse. The disastrous Russian campaign had shattered the Grande Army and undermined Napoleon's reputation, leaving France vulnerable to the forces of a newly united Europe. As his enemies rallied against him, Napoleon fought with relentless determination to hold on to power, navigating political turmoil, betrayal, and the pressures of a coalition of European powers determined to end his rule. In this chapter, we explore Napoleon's final battles, his exile to Elba, and the dramatic episode known as the 100 Days, which culminated in his ultimate defeat at Waterloo. The fall of Napoleon marked the end of an era and forever altered the political landscape of Europe. 8.1 Rebuilding after Russia, a desperate attempt to regain power. Returning from Russia in late 1812, Napoleon faced the daunting task of rebuilding his army and stabilizing his empire. The Russian campaign had depleted France's military resources, and Napoleon found himself without the seasoned veterans who had been the backbone of his previous campaigns. Determined to recover, he quickly implemented a massive conscription drive, calling up young, inexperienced soldiers in what became known as the Marie-Louises, named after his wife, Empress Marie-Louise. Although these young conscripts lacked experience, Napoleon drilled them rigorously, hoping to reconstitute a force capable of defending his empire. In addition to rebuilding his army, Napoleon sought to restore confidence among the French people, who were increasingly disillusioned by years of war, economic hardship, and conscription. However, public morale was low, and the heavy taxation and military drafts bred resentment and opposition. The Russian campaign had shaken the trust of both his subjects and his allies, and uprisings and dissents simmered beneath the surface. Nevertheless, Napoleon's charisma and unyielding determination inspired loyalty among his closest supporters, who remained committed to his cause despite the overwhelming odds. 8.2. The Sixth Coalition, Europe united against Napoleon. Napoleon's weakened state did not go unnoticed by his adversaries. In 1813, a coalition of European powers, including Russia, Prussia, Austria, Sweden, and Britain, united against him in what became known as the Sixth Coalition. Recognizing their common interest in ending Napoleon's dominance, the coalition allies coordinated their military efforts and resolved to confront him in a decisive campaign across Germany. The coalition amassed a formidable force, outnumbering Napoleon's hastily reassembled army. Despite his weakened position, Napoleon's tactical brilliance remained intact, and he achieved several impressive victories, including the battles of Lutzen, Bautzen, and Dresden. These battles demonstrated his resilience and his ability to outmaneuver his enemies even under difficult circumstances. However, Napoleon's victories were costly, and his army was increasingly stretched thin, unable to replace casualties with experienced soldiers. The culmination of the coalition's efforts came in October 1813 at the Battle of Leipzig, also known as the Battle of Nations. It was the largest battle in Europe prior to World War I, involving over 500,000 soldiers from across the continent. After days of intense fighting, Napoleon was ultimately defeated, and his forces were forced to retreat. The defeat at Leipzig marked a turning point in the Napoleonic Wars, as it shattered Napoleon's control over Germany and forced him to withdraw to French soil. 8.3. The invasion of France and the fall of Paris. Following the defeat at Leipzig, the coalition armies advanced into France in early 1814, determined to bring an end to Napoleon's reign. For the first time, foreign troops were marching on French soil, and Napoleon's empire was unraveling from within as well as from without. Despite his precarious position, Napoleon mounted a tenacious defense, fighting a series of fierce battles in what became known as the Campaign of France. Napoleon's maneuvers during the campaign demonstrated his tactical brilliance. He achieved victories in several engagements, such as the battles of Champaubert, Montmirail, and Montereau, displaying his ability to adapt to difficult circumstances. Yet these victories could not turn the tide. With Paris under siege, Napoleon's marshals, weary of the endless fighting and doubting the feasibility of a final victory, began to urge him to negotiate peace. In March 1814, with coalition forces closing in on the capital, Paris fell to the Allied armies. The fall of Paris dealt a crushing blow to Napoleon's prestige and his claims of invincibility. The capture of the city marked the end of the Napoleonic Empire in its current form, and Napoleon's once loyal supporters, including his own marshals, began to abandon him. 8.4. The abdication and exile to Elba. With his position untenable, Napoleon was left with no choice but to abdicate. On April 6, 1814, he formally renounced his throne, ending nearly 15 years of his rule. The coalition powers, wary of executing him and turning him into a martyr, instead chose to exile him to the small Mediterranean island of Elba. Under the terms of the Treaty of Fontainebleau, Napoleon was allowed to retain the title of emperor and was granted sovereignty over Elba, along with a modest personal guard. Elba, though small and isolated, became a miniature empire for Napoleon. He took charge of the island's administration, reorganized its infrastructure, and implemented economic reforms. Despite his diminished circumstances, he maintained his dignity, displaying an almost defiant determination to govern Elba as if it were a major European power. However, Napoleon's restlessness and enduring ambition meant that he could not remain content in exile for long. He kept informed of developments in France and Europe, waiting for an opportunity to reclaim his throne. 8.5. The return to France, The 100 Days. Napoleon's exile to Elba proved short-lived. In France, the restored Bourbon monarchy under King Louis XVIII struggled to gain legitimacy and faced opposition from both the French people and former Bonapartists who resented the return of the old regime. Dissatisfaction with the Bourbons, combined with the fading memory of Napoleon's failures, created an atmosphere ripe for his return. Sensing the weakness of the Bourbon regime, Napoleon made a daring decision to escape from Elba and return to France. On March 1, 1815, Napoleon landed in the south of France with a small contingent of loyal followers. As he marched northward, he encountered government troops sent to arrest him. However, in a show of dramatic defiance, Napoleon approached the soldiers, unarmed, declaring, "If there is any among you who would kill his emperor, here I am." Instead of arresting him, the soldiers rallied to his cause, and his march to Paris became a triumphant procession as more troops and supporters joined him along the way. Within weeks, Napoleon reclaimed his throne, marking the beginning of the 100 Days, a brief period in which he re-established himself as Emperor of the French. Determined to restore his empire and secure his legacy, Napoleon set about assembling an army to defend against the inevitable coalition response. He issued decrees promising reforms and peace, seeking to rally the French people and avoid another prolonged war. Yet the coalition powers, now more determined than ever to end his reign, declared him an outlaw and mobilized their forces for a final confrontation. 8.6. The Battle of Waterloo, Napoleon's last stand. The decisive moment came on June 18, 1815, at the Battle of Waterloo in Belgium. Facing the combined armies of the Duke of Wellington's British forces and the Prussian army under Field Marshal Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher, Napoleon prepared for a battle that would determine his fate and the future of France. Confident in his ability to outmaneuver his opponents, Napoleon sought to divide the British and Prussian forces, hoping to defeat each army separately. However, several factors worked against him. The battlefield at Waterloo was muddy from recent rain, delaying his artillery's effectiveness and hampering his mobility. Additionally, some of his most trusted marshals, including Marshal Ney, misinterpreted his orders, resulting in critical tactical errors. Despite the initial success of his forces, including the near breakthrough of Wellington's lines, the arrival of the Prussian army late in the afternoon turned the tide against Napoleon. As Prussian reinforcements attacked Napoleon's right flank, the French army became overwhelmed. By evening, the Grande Army was in disarray, and Napoleon's final bid for power collapsed. Realizing the battle was lost, he fled the field, marking the end of his rule and the end of an era. The defeat at Waterloo became one of the most famous military engagements in history, symbolizing the final fall of a leader whose ambition had reshaped Europe. 8.7. The Second Abdication and Surrender to the British. In the wake of Waterloo, Napoleon returned to Paris, where he faced intense pressure from his advisors and political leaders to abdicate once more. Recognizing that he could no longer hold on to power, he abdicated for the second time on June 22, 1815. Initially, he hoped to escape to the United States, but his plans were thwarted by the British, who had blockaded France's ports to prevent his departure. Realizing that further resistance was futile, Napoleon surrendered to the British aboard the HMS Bellerophon on July 15, 1815. The British government, unwilling to risk another escape or resurgence of Bonapartism, decided to exile him to the remote island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic. Unlike Elba, St. Helena was isolated and nearly impossible to escape from, ensuring that Napoleon would remain in permanent exile. 8.8. Exile on St. Helena, Reflections and Legacy. Napoleon's final years on St. Helena were marked by illness, isolation, and reflection. Although he continued to maintain a dignified presence, his health deteriorated rapidly due to the harsh conditions and possible illness, which some historians believe may have been stomach cancer. On the island, he dictated his memoirs, offering his version of his life and reign, casting himself as a misunderstood hero and visionary who had been thwarted by the jealous powers of Europe. During his exile, Napoleon's thoughts often turned to France and his legacy. He viewed himself as a man of destiny, chosen to lead France and spread the ideals of the revolution across Europe. Yet his self-justifications were tinged with regret, as he acknowledged the role his ambition had played in leading to his downfall. He died on May 5, 1821, at the age of 51, leaving behind a legacy that would continue to shape the course of European history. 8.9 At the end of an era and Napoleon's lasting legacy. Napoleon's fall marked the end of a period of unprecedented upheaval, reform, and military conquest. His campaigns and reforms transformed France and Europe, reshaping borders, legal systems, and social structures. Although his ambition ultimately led to his downfall, his vision and achievements left an indelible mark on history. The Napoleonic Code, his administrative reforms, and his influence on military strategy continue to be studied and admired. Napoleon's legacy is one of contradiction, a leader who championed the ideals of the revolution but ruled as an emperor, a conqueror who sought to bring peace, and a visionary whose ambition ultimately consumed him. The fall of Napoleon brought an end to the Napoleonic Wars, ushering in a new era of balance in Europe with the Congress of Vienna. Yet Napoleon remains one of history's most fascinating and complex figures, a man whose rise and fall encapsulate both the triumphs and the tragedies of power. Chapter 9. The Final Defeat at Waterloo. The Battle of Waterloo on June 18, 1815, marked the end of Napoleon Bonaparte's reign and the definitive collapse of his ambitions to establish a European empire. In the wake of his return from exile on Elba, Napoleon's 100 Days campaign was a last-ditch attempt to regain control over France and reassert his dominance in Europe. However, his return only intensified the resolve of the coalition powers, who saw in Napoleon a destabilizing force that had to be eliminated once and for all. In this chapter, we explore the events leading up to Waterloo, the tactical decisions and errors that influenced the battle's outcome, and the final moments that led to Napoleon's historic defeat. 9.1. The 100 Days, Napoleon's return and the coalition's response. Napoleon's escape from Elba in March 1815 shocked Europe. Landing on the southern coast of France, he embarked on a dramatic march northward, reclaiming power without bloodshed as soldiers, officials, and citizens rallied to his cause. Within weeks, he had reinstalled himself as emperor, reinstating the revolutionary reforms and promising stability and prosperity. This period, known as the 100 Days, was a brief resurgence of Napoleon's reign, and it sent shockwaves through Europe's ruling powers. The coalition powers, united under the Treaty of Vienna, immediately declared Napoleon an outlaw and vowed to remove him from power once and for all. Britain, Prussia, Austria, and Russia began mobilizing their forces, forming an allied army to converge on France. Knowing that his only chance lay in a swift and decisive military victory, Napoleon moved to preemptively strike the coalition forces before they could unite against him. His strategy focused on dividing the British and Prussian armies, defeating them separately and thus diminishing the coalition's strength. 9.2. The battle plan, dividing the Allies. Napoleon's plan was to disrupt the coalition forces by attacking the Anglo-Allied army, led by the Duke of Wellington, and the Prussian army under Field Marshal Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher. Napoleon aimed to strike quickly and decisively, exploiting his reputation for rapid, aggressive maneuvers. He hoped that by defeating Wellington and Blücher individually, he could weaken the coalition and potentially negotiate peace terms that would allow him to retain his position. On June 16, Napoleon engaged Blücher's Prussian forces at the Battle of Ligny, achieving a hard-fought victory. Although the Prussian army was forced to retreat, It was not destroyed, which would later prove critical. Simultaneously, Marshal Michel Ney, one of Napoleon's trusted commanders, engaged Wellington's forces at the Battle of Quatre-Bras but failed to secure a decisive victory. The Prussians, though retreating, remained largely intact, and Ney's lack of success meant that Wellington's forces were still operational. This partial victory, while important, left Napoleon's plan to isolate and defeat his enemies incomplete. Despite the setbacks, Napoleon pressed on, confident in his ability to achieve a decisive victory. He ordered his army to pursue Wellington, believing that if he could defeat the British, the coalition would be forced to reconsider its plans. 9.3. The battlefield at Waterloo. Waterloo was a small village in present-day Belgium, situated along a strategic route between Brussels and Paris. On June 18, 1815, the Anglo-Allied army, led by the Duke of Wellington, took up defensive positions on a ridge near the village, preparing for the confrontation they knew was imminent. Wellington's troops, numbering around 68,000, were well positioned, with strong defensive positions and the support of local terrain. Behind the ridge, a sunken road provided hidden cover, and nearby farms were fortified to provide additional strongholds. Napoleon's forces, numbering around 72,000, faced a series of challenges from the outset. Heavy rain the night before had turned the fields into a muddy quagmire, delaying the deployment of his artillery and making movement across the battlefield difficult. Despite these conditions, Napoleon, confident in his tactical prowess, decided to proceed with the assault. However, the delays allowed Wellington to strengthen his positions and await reinforcements from Blücher's Prussian army. 9.4. The battle begins. French attacks on Hougoumont and La Haye-Sainte. The battle commenced in the late morning as Napoleon ordered a diversionary attack on Hougoumont, a fortified farmhouse on Wellington's right flank. Although it was not intended to be the main focus of the battle, the fighting at Hougoumont became intense and prolonged, as both sides committed significant forces to the engagement. The British forces, particularly the Guards, defended the farmhouse with ferocity, repelling repeated French assaults. Hougoumont held throughout the day, and the fierce resistance there distracted French forces and diverted critical resources from the main battle. In the center, Napoleon launched an attack on La Haye-Sainte, a key farm occupied by British forces. The French sought to capture this position to create an opening in Wellington's lines. Despite multiple assaults, the British troops tenaciously held the farm, withstanding artillery and musket fire. The intense fighting over Hougoumont and La Haye-Sainte became symbolic of the resilience of Wellington's forces and foreshadowed the difficulties Napoleon's army would face throughout the day. 9.5. The cavalry charges. Ney's fateful decision. In the early afternoon, Marshal Ney observed what he believed to be signs of retreat among the British troops. Acting on this misjudgment, he ordered a massive cavalry assault, sending thousands of French horsemen charging up the hill toward the British lines. Ney's decision, made without adequate infantry support or coordination, proved disastrous. The British soldiers formed defensive squares, a formation designed to repel cavalry attacks, and held their ground as the French cavalry repeatedly charged the line, only to be repulsed each time. These costly and futile charges drained the strength of the French cavalry and exposed Ney's forces to British artillery. Napoleon, unable to halt Ney's misjudgment in time, watched as valuable men and horses were lost in a series of ineffective attacks. The repeated charges weakened the French position, while Wellington's forces, despite suffering heavy casualties, managed to maintain their defensive formations. 9.6. The arrival of the Prussians, turning the tide. As the battle raged, Blücher's Prussian forces arrived on the battlefield, attacking Napoleon's right flank. The Prussians, though weakened by their earlier defeat at Ligny, were determined to aid Wellington and end Napoleon's reign once and for all. The arrival of the Prussian forces placed Napoleon in an impossible position, forcing him to split his forces to counter both the British in front of him and the Prussians on his flank. Despite the overwhelming odds, Napoleon ordered a final assault on Wellington's center, committing his Imperial Guard, the elite, veteran troops who had won him countless victories in the past. The sight of the Imperial Guard advancing inspired both sides. For the French, it was a rallying cry, while for the British and Prussians, it was a final test of their endurance. In a dramatic and desperate push, the Imperial Guard advanced, but they met with fierce resistance. British infantry and artillery repelled the attack, and as the Guard began to falter, panic spread through the French ranks. For the first time in Napoleon's career, the Imperial Guard retreated. The sight of the invincible Guard falling back shattered French morale, and the Grande Army began to collapse in disarray. 9.7. The final moments and Napoleon's flight. As evening fell, the French army was in full retreat, pursued by the coalition forces. Napoleon, recognizing that the battle was lost, tried to rally his troops, but the defeat was total. Wellington and Blücher met on the battlefield, united in their shared victory, and Napoleon fled the field, returning to Paris in the wake of his crushing loss. The defeat at Waterloo marked the end of Napoleon's final bid for power. His empire, already weakened, was now beyond salvation, and his return to Paris only underscored the hopelessness of his situation. His political allies, fearful of retribution from the coalition, pressured him to abdicate once again, and on June 22, 1815, Napoleon relinquished his throne for the second and final time. 9.8. The aftermath of Waterloo, the end of the Napoleonic era. The Battle of Waterloo was a watershed moment in European history, marking the definitive end of the Napoleonic Wars and the beginning of a new order on the continent. For Napoleon, the defeat was both personal and symbolic, representing the collapse of his dream to unify Europe under French rule. His ambition, which had once seemed boundless, had ultimately led him to a field in Belgium where his reign and his empire would come to a conclusive end. In the weeks following Waterloo, Napoleon attempted to flee to America, but the British, who had blockaded France's ports, prevented his escape. On July 15, 1815, Napoleon surrendered to the British and was subsequently exiled to the remote island of St. Helena, where he would spend the remainder of his life. For Europe, the defeat of Napoleon brought an end to nearly 2 decades of war and instability. The coalition powers convened at the Congress of Vienna, where they sought to restore balance to the continent, redrawing borders and reinstating monarchies in an effort to prevent the rise of another figure like Napoleon. The conservative order that emerged from the Congress of Vienna aimed to create stability, though the seeds of nationalism and liberalism that Napoleon had sown would continue to influence European politics. 9.9. The legacy of Waterloo and Napoleon's enduring influence. The Battle of Waterloo has remained one of history's most studied and debated military engagements, symbolizing both the finality of Napoleon's ambition and the resilience of those who opposed him. While the battle itself was a tactical defeat, Napoleon's legacy as a military strategist, visionary leader, and revolutionary reformer endures. His impact on military strategy, law, governance, and the spread of Enlightenment ideals across Europe has left a lasting mark. Napoleon's fall at Waterloo serves as a powerful reminder of the dangers of overreach and the limits of ambition. His life and career, from his meteoric rise to his dramatic fall, encapsulate the complexities of leadership, the cost of power, and the influence of a single individual on the course of history. As we prepare to explore the legacy of Napoleon in the final chapter, we reflect on the lessons his life offers, the triumphs of ambition, the consequences of hubris, and the enduring fascination with a leader who, despite his flaws, remains one of history's most compelling figures. Chapter 10. Legacy of Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon Bonaparte's influence extended far beyond the battlefields of Europe. Though his empire ultimately fell, his legacy endured in the political, legal, and cultural transformations that reshaped Europe and influenced the world. Napoleon's impact on governance, law, military strategy, and even national identity left a lasting imprint on modern history. This final chapter examines Napoleon's legacy, exploring how his ambitions and reforms set the stage for the modern state, how his military tactics transformed warfare, and how his life inspired generations, sparking debates that continue to this day. 10.1. The Napoleonic Code, a legal revolution. Perhaps Napoleon's most enduring legacy is the Napoleonic Code, which he introduced in 1804 as a comprehensive system of civil law. The code established principles of equality before the law, the protection of private property, secular governance, and standardized legal procedures. It marked a significant departure from the complex and regionally fragmented laws of pre-revolutionary France, creating a unified legal system accessible to all citizens. The code's clarity, simplicity, and fairness made it widely admired, and its influence spread across Europe and beyond as Napoleon's empire expanded. Today, the Napoleonic Code remains the foundation of civil law in France and has influenced legal systems in countries across Europe, Latin America, and parts of Africa. By enshrining the principles of personal liberty and equality, the code reflected Enlightenment ideals and aligned with the revolutionary goals of justice and secularism. However, it also reinforced traditional gender roles, limiting the rights of women, a reflection of Napoleon's conservative social views. Despite its limitations, the code has stood the test of time, serving as a model for civil law systems worldwide and solidifying Napoleon's legacy as a reformer. 10.2. Modernization and centralization of government. Napoleon's approach to governance was marked by a drive for efficiency, centralization, and uniformity. Under his rule, France's administration was overhauled, with new systems for taxation, education, and civil service that aimed to create a meritocratic and effective state. His reforms established the foundation of the modern bureaucratic state, with professional civil servants appointed based on merit rather than birth or wealth. Napoleon's creation of the prefecture system, in which prefects appointed by the central government managed regions throughout France, centralized power and ensured loyalty to the state. This model of centralized governance, in which national unity was enforced by state-appointed officials, became an influential framework for modern states. The public education reforms he introduced, notably the establishment of lycées, aimed to create a loyal and educated citizenry capable of supporting the state, fostering a sense of national identity. The structure of modern European states, with centralized administrations and uniform legal codes, owes much to Napoleon's vision. Though his reforms were often authoritarian, they brought stability to France after years of revolutionary turmoil and created a cohesive administrative structure that many countries would later emulate. 10.3. Military innovations and the transformation of warfare. Napoleon was a military genius whose innovations in strategy and tactics transformed warfare and influenced military doctrine for centuries. He pioneered the use of the corps system, organizing his army into semi-autonomous units capable of independent action and rapid deployment. This structure allowed for greater flexibility and responsiveness on the battlefield, as each corps could operate independently while remaining part of a coordinated whole. His emphasis on speed, surprise, and decisive maneuvers disrupted traditional military tactics, allowing him to win a series of stunning victories against numerically superior forces. Napoleon's strategies, including the use of artillery as an offensive weapon and his focus on concentrated firepower, have been studied and emulated by military leaders worldwide. His ability to inspire loyalty and morale among his troops, combined with his innovative use of logistics to sustain large armies on long campaigns, set new standards for military leadership. Notably, his campaigns served as case studies for military academies, including the United States Military Academy at West Point, where his tactics have been analyzed and taught for generations. However, Napoleon's aggressive approach to warfare also highlighted the risks of overextension. His campaigns in Spain and Russia revealed the limits of his military strategies, and his reliance on constant expansion ultimately exhausted his resources and weakened his empire. Nevertheless, Napoleon's influence on military strategy and organization remains profound, and he is often regarded as one of history's greatest military leaders. 10.4. The spread of nationalism and the redrawing of Europe. Napoleon's conquests reshaped Europe's borders and inadvertently sowed the seeds of nationalism. By consolidating smaller states into larger political entities, such as the Confederation of the Rhine and the Kingdom of Italy, he disrupted the traditional feudal order and fostered a sense of national identity among the people of these regions. Napoleon's reforms promoted the ideals of citizenship, meritocracy, and loyalty to the state, encouraging people to identify with their nation rather than a monarch. The Napoleonic Wars also ignited nationalist sentiments among his opponents, as resistance to French rule inspired movements for national unity and independence. In Spain, the Peninsular War sparked a powerful resistance movement that was both anti-French and pro-Spanish, laying the groundwork for Spanish nationalism. Similarly, in Germany and Italy, resentment of French control contributed to the rise of nationalist movements that would later lead to unification in the 19th century. The Congress of Vienna in 1815, which sought to restore the pre-revolutionary order, also marked the beginning of modern diplomacy and the concept of the balance of power. However, the ideas of self-determination and national identity that Napoleon's empire inadvertently promoted could not be easily suppressed, and the wave of nationalism he helped spark would continue to shape European politics long after his defeat. 10.5. Napoleon's cultural legacy and symbolism. Napoleon remains a figure of fascination and debate, his life inspiring countless works of literature, art, and music. His personality, charisma, and achievements have made him one of the most mythologized figures in history. This Napoleonic legend, carefully crafted by Napoleon himself through propaganda and later sustained by his followers, portrays him as a champion of the revolution, a military genius, and a man of destiny. This romanticized view has contributed to a cult of personality around him, which has endured through the centuries. In literature, Napoleon has been the subject of works by authors such as Leo Tolstoy in War and Peace and Victor Hugo in Les Miserables, who grappled with his impact on society and the human cost of his ambitions. Artists such as Jacques-Louis David immortalized his image in grand portraits, and composers like Ludwig van Beethoven, who initially admired Napoleon, were influenced by the era's dramatic events. Over time, Napoleon's life has become a symbol of both the potential and the pitfalls of ambition, a figure whose rise and fall illustrate the complexities of power and legacy. 10.6. Controversies and critiques of Napoleon's legacy. Despite his many achievements, Napoleon's legacy is not without controversy. His rule was marked by authoritarianism, as he restricted press freedom, censored criticism, and created a police state to monitor dissent. His ambition for empire came at a high cost, with millions of lives lost in the Napoleonic Wars and significant social and economic disruption across Europe. His military campaigns left a trail of destruction, and his rule ultimately betrayed many of the ideals of liberty and equality that he had once championed. Napoleon's treatment of women, minorities, and conquered peoples has also faced criticism. The Napoleonic Code, while progressive in its principles of legal equality, reinforced gender inequality and limited women's rights, reflecting a conservative view of society. His policies toward conquered territories, while often modernizing, were also exploitative, with heavy taxes and conscription imposed on subject states to support his empire. These criticisms have fueled debate among historians, with some viewing Napoleon as a visionary reformer and others as a tyrant whose pursuit of power undermined the values he claimed to uphold. His legacy, therefore, remains complex, embodying both the promise of the Enlightenment and the dangers of unrestrained ambition. 10.7. The influence on modern leaders and ideologies. Napoleon's impact extended beyond his era, as his leadership style, governance, and charisma influenced generations of political and military leaders. His ability to inspire loyalty and his talent for strategic thinking have been studied and emulated by leaders such as Otto von Bismarck, who admired his diplomatic skill, and later figures like Charles de Gaulle, who saw in Napoleon a model of French strength and resilience. In the 20th century, dictators like Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini studied Napoleon's rise and his techniques for consolidating power, though they pursued vastly different ideological goals. Napoleon's legacy served as both an inspiration and a cautionary tale for those who sought to reshape nations and pursue political ambitions, illustrating the fine line between visionary leadership and authoritarianism. The Napoleonic era also gave rise to modern concepts of leadership and statecraft, shaping the way we think about governance, the relationship between the state and its citizens, and the role of the military in society. Napoleon's impact on political philosophy and his example as a leader who redefined his era continue to influence contemporary discussions about power and leadership. 10.8. Conclusion: Napoleon's enduring legacy. Napoleon Bonaparte's life and career left an indelible mark on history, embodying both the revolutionary spirit of his age and the timeless lessons of ambition, leadership, and consequence. His achievements in law, governance, and military strategy set new standards, and his influence continues to shape legal systems, political thought, and military doctrine. Napoleon's legacy is one of complexity and contradiction. A man who brought order to chaos, yet created chaos in pursuit of order. A leader who championed equality, yet ruled as an emperor. His story resonates as a testament to the potential of an individual to influence the course of history, for better or worse. His life is a powerful reminder of the heights of human achievement and the perils of overreach, inspiring both admiration and caution. Napoleon's legacy lives on not only in the systems he reformed and the wars he fought, but in the enduring fascination he inspires as one of history's most enigmatic and influential figures. His impact will forever serve as a lens through which we understand the power, challenges, and complexities of leadership. Napoleon's impact on history. Napoleon Bonaparte's journey from a young Corsican officer to the Emperor of the French remains one of the most extraordinary stories in history. His life and career embodied the potential of vision and ambition to reshape entire nations, as well as the dangers that accompany unrestrained power. The effects of Napoleon's actions were profound and far-reaching, spanning politics, law, warfare, and culture. In this concluding chapter, we reflect on the enduring influence of Napoleon, examining his contributions to modern governance, his role in fostering the rise of nationalism, and the lessons his life offers about the balance between power and responsibility. 11.1. A revolutionary reformer and an emperor of contradictions. Napoleon's achievements were both inspired by and rooted in the ideals of the French Revolution. His early political reforms aligned with revolutionary principles of equality, meritocracy, and secular governance, which he implemented through initiatives like the Napoleonic Code, the centralization of the state, and educational reform. In many ways, Napoleon carried the revolution's ideals forward, enshrining them in law and ensuring that they became permanent fixtures in French society. His reforms strengthened the state, created a more just legal system and improved the efficiency of governance, laying a foundation that has endured in France and beyond. Yet, Napoleon's life was also marked by profound contradictions. While he championed the ideals of liberty, he ruled as an emperor, wielding near-absolute power and restricting freedoms to ensure his control. Though he advocated for equality, he constructed a regime that often favored loyalty over liberty, undermining the same values he initially sought to defend. His legacy reflects this paradox, offering a portrait of a leader whose accomplishments were as remarkable as the conflicts they stirred. 11.2. The global spread of the Napoleonic Code. The Napoleonic Code stands as one of Napoleon's most influential contributions to modern society. With its principles of equality before the law, the protection of property rights, and secular governance, the code became a model for legal systems worldwide. In France, the code abolished feudal privileges and established a civil law system accessible to all citizens. In doing so, it helped create a sense of unity and fairness that underpinned the modern French state. As Napoleon's armies advanced across Europe, they brought the code with them, introducing its principles to Italy, the Netherlands, Belgium, and parts of Germany and Spain. The code's emphasis on individual rights and a just legal system resonated with many reformers, and its impact can still be seen in legal systems throughout Europe, Latin America, and parts of Africa. The enduring influence of the Napoleonic Code exemplifies how Napoleon's legacy transcends his military and political achievements, providing a lasting contribution to the rule of law. 11.3. Transforming modern warfare and military leadership. Napoleon revolutionized military strategy, reshaping the art of warfare in ways that continue to influence military thought. His use of the corps system, which allowed for independent units to operate under a unified command, transformed the way armies were organized and deployed. His emphasis on speed, maneuverability, and concentrated force became hallmarks of his campaigns, enabling him to achieve decisive victories against numerically superior enemies. The influence of Napoleon's strategies can be seen in military institutions and doctrines worldwide, from the teachings at West Point to the methods used in modern combat. His ability to inspire loyalty and courage in his troops, combined with his willingness to innovate and adapt on the battlefield, set a standard for military leadership that remains relevant today. Yet, his later failures, particularly the Russian campaign, highlight the risks of overconfidence and the limits of even the most brilliant strategies. 11.4. The rise of nationalism and the unification of Europe. One of Napoleon's unintended legacies was the rise of nationalism. By consolidating smaller states into larger political entities and promoting loyalty to the state over loyalty to a monarch, Napoleon encouraged the emergence of national identity across Europe. In countries such as Germany, Italy, and Spain, the resistance to French occupation fostered a sense of national unity, leading to movements for independence and unification in the decades that followed. This wave of nationalism reshaped Europe's political landscape, contributing to the unification of Italy and Germany in the 19th century and sparking independence movements in Latin America. Although Napoleon's own vision was of a Europe unified under French influence, the ideals of self-determination and national identity that emerged from his empire would challenge the balance of power in Europe and influence conflicts for generations. The spread of nationalism ultimately became one of the most powerful forces of the modern era, shaping the course of history long after Napoleon's reign ended. 11.5. The cult of Napoleon and the power of charisma. Napoleon's life story is as much about personality as it is about policy. His charisma, ambition, and self-confidence captivated those around him, allowing him to inspire loyalty and devotion among his soldiers and citizens alike. This Napoleonic legend began to take shape even during his lifetime, as he crafted an image of himself as a man of destiny, chosen to lead France to greatness. This image was reinforced by his skillful use of propaganda and his ability to connect with people, whether on the battlefield or in public ceremonies. After his death, Napoleon became a symbol of ambition, courage, and visionary leadership. Artists, writers, and historians immortalized his life, creating a lasting image of a leader who both embodied and defied his era. His life inspired countless works of literature, art, and music, establishing him as a cultural icon whose appeal has endured for centuries. That's Napoleonic complex, a term often used to describe an intense drive for success and power, testifies to the enduring fascination with his personality and achievements. 11.6 Lessons on Ambition, Leadership, and the Limits of Power. Napoleon's life offers powerful lessons on the complexities of leadership and the consequences of ambition. His rise to power demonstrated the potential for a single individual to shape the course of history, while his fall highlighted the dangers of overreach. Napoleon's relentless pursuit of dominance eventually led to his downfall, as his empire became stretched beyond its capacity and his resources exhausted by constant warfare. Napoleon's story serves as a cautionary tale about the balance between ambition and pragmatism. While his achievements were remarkable, they came at a tremendous cost, not only for France but for all of Europe. His life illustrates the importance of restraint, humility, and the recognition that even the most powerful leaders are subject to the constraints of circumstance and the limits of human capacity. 11.7 Napoleon's Place in History, a Legacy of Complexity and Influence. Napoleon remains one of history's most studied and debated figures. Historians view him through multiple lenses, some as a revolutionary hero who advanced the ideals of liberty and progress, others as a tyrant whose ambition led to untold suffering. His life embodies the complexities of power, as he navigated the challenges of leadership with a mix of brilliance, pragmatism, and authoritarian control. The Napoleonic era reshaped Europe, setting in motion changes that would reverberate for generations. The institutions he reformed, the laws he codified, and the ideals he championed helped to shape the modern state, while the example of his life has inspired both admiration and caution. Napoleon's influence endures in the fields of law, military strategy, governance, and culture, leaving a legacy that continues to captivate and challenge us. 11.8 Final Reflections: The Man, the Emperor, and the Legend. In the end, Napoleon Bonaparte was a man of extraordinary vision and contradiction. He was a revolutionary who became an emperor, a champion of equality who ruled as an autocrat, and a master strategist whose ambition ultimately led to his undoing. His life story, from his rise to his exile on St. Helena, captures the duality of human greatness and human fallibility. As we reflect on Napoleon's impact on history, we see a legacy that is as complex as the man himself. A legacy that embodies both the heights of human potential and the dangers of unchecked ambition. Napoleon's life reminds us that leadership is as much about vision and drive as it is about humility and restraint, offering timeless lessons for those who seek to shape the world. In the centuries since his death, Napoleon's legacy has continued to evolve, with each generation finding new meanings in his story. His influence on law, governance, and military strategy remains deeply ingrained in the modern world, a testament to the enduring power of his achievements. As a figure who defied convention and shaped his era, Napoleon Bonaparte stands as one of history's most captivating and influential individuals, a man whose legacy continues to inspire, challenge, and provoke us to this day.